my name is Gloria and welcome to another video. This is part 3, my third quarterly wrap-up. I did January through March, April through June, and now I'm doing July through September. I read 25 books in those 3 months, 6 books in July, 8 books in August, and 11 books in September. I read a lot of books, and I read a lot more than I did in the beginning of the year. Partly because of the pandemic and everything that's going on, and I just fell in love with booktube, fell in love with the reading, really stopped watching like shows and movies besides watching The Office with my husband. Use my spare time that I have in the mornings and the evenings to read. So I read a lot of books and I'm really into books, hence why I'm making these videos. The first book I read in July, and I have 3 of the books that I own physically. All the rest of them are going to be on a screen because they're either audiobook or I got them from the library and don't have the physical copy anymore. But the very first book that I read in July was Delighting in the Trinity, An Introduction to the Christian Faith by Michael Reeves. This was a book that I read with my friend Lily. We were reading it together and then we would talk about each chapter. I grew up in the church. I understood the concept of the Trinity, but didn't really think much about it. And this book is pretty dense in theology, which was a little intimidating for me, but it was really well written and just really incredible. I highly recommend for anyone who is a believer. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I really, really liked this book. And the next book that I read in July was Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor by Layla Saeed. This was right in the midst of the Black Lives Matter, and I really wanted to learn more about it because I wasn't educated enough, and I'm still not even close to understand everything that was going on, like all of the stuff that was under the surface. But this book is basically more like a journal. There's daily prompts and vocabulary that you learn about and concepts that you learn about, and then there's a series of questions that you ask yourself, and it's really like to take a deep dive into yourself and realizing certain prejudices and stuff that each of us carries and holds and stuff that we believe and may not understand why we believe those things and whatnot. I really like this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5. It was very educational for me to learn about it. I barely scratched the surface. I know I have so many more that I want to read in the future, so I'm excited to do more learning on that topic. But yeah, this one was great and highly recommend if you are interested in that, which we all should be. The next book that I read is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This was a recommendation from a clockwork reader, Hannah, on BookTube. It's one of her favorite books. And ever since getting into BookTube and watching a billion people, I have like a never-ending TBR list. Literally so many screenshots on my phone and on Goodreads and everything of all the books that I want to read. The books that I enjoy are it's like a vast spectrum. I'll pretty much read anything, I think. This was a recommendation. I'm not really into fantasy and like magical stuff that much, besides like Harry Potter. The Night Circus is this magical story about this magical circus that appears in different towns, and this is the story of 2 characters who are both magicians. They're like pitted against each other and have to it's like a competition. They have to outperform the other in their magical abilities, and the stage and the setting of this competition is the circus. And there's this love story, and this is very atmospheric, very whimsical and magical and wonderful. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I liked it. I'm surprised that I gave it a 4 out of 5 because it was pretty ambiguous. I sort of didn't exactly know what was happening some of the time. It was a fun read, and I totally get why people like this book. So I gave it a 4 out of 5. I enjoyed it. It was very fun to listen to. And one of the main reasons why I think I liked it was because Jim Dale narrates it. Jim Dale's the narrator of the Harry Potter series. His voice is amazing, and he's a fantastic narrator, and it was all about magic, so that was really fun. And then speaking of Jim Dale and Harry Potter, that is the next book that I finished in July was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, so book number 5. My husband and I are, as I mentioned in the previous videos, listening to these books on audio because he's never read them, and so whenever we're in the car together or like cooking or cleaning or something, we'll put it on, and we've been really enjoying it. I'm a big Harry Potter fanatic, really love it, watch and read too much stuff about Harry Potter, so it's really fun to like get him to be into it too. And we play a lot of Heads Up on our phones, And I have the Harry Potter deck. There's stuff in there that's from like the 7th and the 6th book and whatnot that he still doesn't know what those things mean or who the characters are. So I'm excited every single time we finish a book because he knows more and more of the Harry Potter like terminology and trivia. So he can better explain it to me and heads up whenever we play. The next book that I read in July was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This is a murder mystery thriller. This is a story of a group of people. It's multiple perspective, multiple timelines. So we start with there's a wedding and someone died. And then it jumps into, it's very fast paced. It takes place in the span of 24 hours. A lot happens and there's a lot of different characters on this island where this wedding is taking place of like fancy British people. And there's a groomsman, the bride, bridesmaid, and like the guest of someone, and there's different perspectives, and you're kind of figuring out, okay, who died and who killed them and why, and who's the bad guy here, and you're you don't trust certain characters, and you kind of think that everyone maybe could have done something, but you don't really know, and then there's a twist at the end, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 3.75, which I rounded up to 4. And what did I say? I said, an entertaining murder mystery. The story unravels from multiple point of views with a wedding on an eerie Irish island. I liked it. If you like thrillers, I would recommend it. It was a fun listen. The next book that I read in July was The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Dimeline. This was a recommendation from Books and Lala. This is one of her favorite books. When she pitched it, I was intrigued to buy it, so I put it on my TBR list, and then I ended up also listening to it on Libby. This is a book set in the future, and the world has kind of fallen apart due to climate change. This book is set in Canada. The native people of the North American continent are on the run because there's also like a sickness in the world, and their bone marrow holds the cure. And so they are caught and murdered to get the cure from like their bodies. I really liked this story, but I wish that there was more about the world, they vaguely mentioned that there was some sickness and that the cure is in the bone marrow. But what's the sickness and how did it get to, it just like jumped to the future, but I wanted to know more about like what actually happened and the timeline. If the book was a little bit longer and more like expansive and I got more background, I feel like it would have become a favorite. It was a really great read. So I really liked it and I would recommend it. I just wish there was a little bit more. Then I read 8 books in August. The first book in August that I read that I actually have a physical copy of. This is City of Thieves by David Benioff. Fun fact, David Benioff is a screenwriter and one of the makers of the show Game of Thrones. That's just a fun fact. This book has nothing to do with Game of Thrones, but I think technically this is historical fiction. But this book is based on David Benioff's grandfather's actual life story and something that he went through in St. Petersburg. So this story takes place in St. Petersburg, or Leningrad as it was known during World War II, and it follows 2 teenagers, one of them being David Benioff's grandfather. It's set in Russia. It's in the middle of the war. It's cold in winter. People are starving and dying. There's no food anywhere, and these teenagers are asked to buy like the main Russian NVKD and KVD, I think is what the initials are for like the police of Russia. The main general forces them to basically they do some minor crime, like staying past curfew. They get caught and the general says, either I kill you or it's my daughter's wedding in a week and there are no eggs and she really wants a wedding cake. So you need to go find me 2 dozen eggs and then you'll be free. That's kind of like the line that I remember when whoever was talking about this book or whenever I read about it, I was like, oh, that sounds super interesting. Like I definitely want to read it. And it's about Russia and I'm Russian. I'm very attached by my culture and like the stories of the motherland. So that's probably why this book was a 5 out of 5 for me, because of the nostalgia, but it's also really funny, very tragic, very sad, beautifully written. I love this story. I was very invested in these characters. There is some crude language and like teenage boy humor, but it makes sense. Like it doesn't take away from the story. It makes sense with the time and the characters and what actually happen and all of these adventures that these two go through and all the different kinds of people that they encounter to find these 24 eggs and to save themselves and like try to survive during war in Russia. So highly recommend. It was the easiest read because it's quite short and the chapters are really short, but this is definitely one of the top books of the year for sure. The next book that I read in August was Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory by Caitlin Doughty. This is a recommendation from Paperback Dreams on BookTube and also Noelle Gallagher. Those two recommended this book. This is a memoir, autobiography type of book on Caitlin Doughty's life. She works at the crematory, tells different stories in like a very comedic way of different stuff that's happened in the crematory, and she kind of breaks down like the death industry and how death and burial kind of works in some other countries. So I really like this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5. In hindsight, I probably would give it like a higher rating because I really liked it. I've always been very interested in cremation because I have always said that I never want to be buried and I would rather my husband or my family cremate me because I think burying a body is like a waste of space. No offense, obviously, to anyone who wants to be buried, but that's just me. I really like this book and I thought her writing was great and her stories were wonderful. The next book that I listened to in August was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. So I didn't really know who Agatha Christie was. She's like a very popular murder mystery writer. I wanted to give it a try because I saw this book somewhere and recommended and I was like, hey, I should read it. So I listened to it. It's narrated by Dan Stevens, who is a British actor popularly known from Downton Abbey. He plays Matthew Crawley. So the narration was great. This book is set on an island and there's a big cast of characters, obviously multiple perspectives. Someone dies and then each day someone keeps dying and you don't really know who's doing the killing. I gave this a 3 out of 5 because I liked it, but I didn't love it because I think I would have liked it more if I read the book, because listening to the book kind of confused me. I would say most of the time I wasn't really sure what was happening, and it was more than just like, oh, I didn't know who was doing what. I was just kind of confused about like, wait, so that person died, why, how, what? And then the ending happened and it was revealed and I was still confused of how that person did that and what was happening. So maybe it might have just been me because this book is very popular and highly rated, but I gave it a 3 out of 5 because I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. The next book that I read in August is Big Little Lies by Leanne Moriarty. I borrowed this book from a friend, so I knew about the story and I knew about the TV show on HBO that I wanted to watch, so I want to read the book first. And I loved this book. I read it in one day. It was so fun, such a great read. I gave it a 5 out of 5. It's a group of women who live in like a posh, fancy town in Australia. They all have like their different dramas going on in their lives and a lot of interesting topics to touch on, particularly with sexual assault and domestic violence. So there's hard topics, but it's written in such an incredible way. I was very invested in the characters. I love the story. It made me laugh out loud a bunch of times. I thought it was great. So, and there's, like a murder involved, so it's also kind of a mystery, but it really has those, I watched Desperate Housewives when I was younger and I loved the show. Someone died and all of these different women are involved, but how and who did what. I watched the show after and I actually didn't like the show as much. I thought that the characters in the books were so great and I feel like they changed a lot of them for the show, which makes me not like it that much, but I get why people like the show, but the book is better. The next book that I read in August was an ebook I read on my phone, and it was An Almost Zero Waste Life, Learning How to Embrace Less to Live More by Megan Weldon. I'll just jump ahead to the other book that I read in August called Zero Waste Home, The Ultimate Guide to Simplifying Your Life by Reducing Your Waste by Bea Johnson. So both of these two books I read in August. I'm interested in this topic. I'm not gonna be like fully zero waste, I don't think, in my life, because that seems really hard. Both of these books I gave a 4 out of 5. I think they did a really great job of breaking down that lifestyle and give really great tips and tricks of like things to change in your life to make you more zero waste. And I'm interested in that topic because I want myself and my household and my family to create less waste and to throw less things away and to also buy and use only things that you really love and care about and not have excess. So both of these are great. If you're at all interested in this lifestyle, I would recommend it. They were both really good reads. My camera keeps dying. I was talking about Beneath the Baobab Tree. This is a true story slash somewhat historical fiction or fictional story based on true events. So this book follows or explains the story of the kidnapped schoolgirls in Nigeria who were kidnapped by the Boko Haram, which is a Islamic terrorist group in Africa. I am absolutely terrible and don't watch the news or like read the news really at all, which is really not great, something I'm very ashamed of. And when I read this book, I was so mad at myself that I didn't know that this happened and that this happened in 2016, which was not that long ago. There's a story written, and then in the end of the book, there's the author describes like the actual true events that happened. I highly recommend this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I absolutely loved it. It's very tragic. It's hard to read. It makes me sad, but it was beautifully written and it's such an amazing story and more people need to know about it. And I'm very sad that I didn't know about it. So I hope that now you know about it and want to read it. It was really, really great. I loved it and it's definitely a favorite and it's definitely one of the books that I will be talking about to people to pick up and read. The next book and final book that I read in August was Wildwood by Colin Malloy. He's a band member in The Decemberist, which is a local, I think like indie folky band in Portland. But this is a middle grade story based in Portland. It follows a girl whose little brother gets kidnapped by some crows and gets taken into the forest. And it follows there's an evil witch and who wants to take over this forest and land, and this girl sets on a journey to find her brother and like save the forest. I gave it a 2 out of 5. Mostly because I realized I probably shouldn't be rating middle grade books. I will say this book is absolutely beautiful, beautifully made, and the cover was amazing and the little illustrations in the book are great. It gives a wonderful ode to Portland. I'm from Portland, so I can appreciate the love of Portland that's seeped into this book. And I think you can really only truly appreciate it if you're at all familiar with the city. But the story was like trying to be Narnia. And I grew up on Narnia and I love Narnia. This was very much like trying to be The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. There's an evil witch and she wants to kill everyone, and she has like an army of animals in the forest who have gone bad, and it's filled with talking animals, this whole story, and there's like a sacrifice that needs to be made, and it's trying to be Narnia, but it just didn't succeed for me, so that's why I gave it a 2 out of 5. The few other people in my circle of friends that have read it absolutely loved it, so it's just me, that's why I gave it a low rating. Off to September, I have 11 books left. The very first book I read in September, I have a physical copy of because I loved it. Salt of the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. This is my first Ruta Sepetys book. This is a World War II historical fiction. I believe I first saw this recommended by Haley in Bookland. I love this book. This was a 5 out of 5 for me and one of my favorite books of the year, if not my favorite book of the year. I believe it's a YA, World War II story about multiple perspectives, 4 different teenagers. It goes between Lithuania and East Prussia. These characters, so they are in Germany-occupied Europe, and the Russian army is closing in and evacuation orders are set out, and all of these German citizens slash other citizens who are in Germany evacuating towards the coast of there's a map in here, of the Baltic Sea, where they can all get on like a converted cruise ship to be taken to safety. So all these characters are trying to like make their way to the coast and get saved. Circumstances happen for them to get on this boat, and then the boat is at risk of sinking because there's Russian war submarines in the water trying to take down this boat. So there's a sinking, and it's basically like the Titanic, but also super tragic. If you love World War II historical fiction, you need to read this book. It was based off a true event that happened. The Wilhelm Gustloff is a ship in Germany that actually sank, that killed over 9,000 people. I did not know that this happened. I feel like in my education of World War II, it was always like about Hitler and the Jews. I feel like I don't have a lot of perspectives of what was going on in German territories and what was happening to like some German citizens. I don't know if I did a good job explaining that. I thought this book was fantastic. It was absolutely beautiful to read, and so sad to read, but I couldn't put it down. The chapters are really short, so it's really easy to get through. The next book I read was With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. This was a young adult teen book. It's based on a girl who's a teenage mom who's also trying to make her way through high school and wants to be a chef. And she's like finding her place in the world of wanting to pursue culinary school, but also still wanting to be a good mom to her small daughter. And she lives with her grandmother, and she's a high school student still, and there's some love interest. I think I would have loved this probably a lot more if I was a teenager. So maybe that means I shouldn't read as many young adult and teen books because I give them lower ratings. But I gave it a 3 out of 5. The cover and the book is beautiful, and I liked the story a lot, and it was a fun read. The next book that I finished in September was Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, book number 6. Was reading that with my husband, or listening to it. That's all I'll say. Harry Potter's still superior. The next book I read in September was How to Break Up with Your Phone, the 30-Day Plan to Take Back Your Life. I'm interested in the topic of digital minimalism and taking digital Sabbaths and being on my phone less, because we all need to do that because everyone is freaking addicted to their phones. The first part of the book explains why we are obsessed with our phones and like a bunch of statistics of what's actually happening, and then the second part of the book is daily challenges. I really liked it. I gave it a 4 out of 5. Highly recommend it if you want to be less attached to this thing. The next book I read in September was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I gave it a 2 out of 5. I didn't like it as much. I had an unpopular opinion. It follows the story of a woman in Hollywood who has a bunch of different love interests. There's certain points of the book that I enjoyed, and certain like kind of twists and stuff that happened that I liked. But overall, I didn't really get much from it. Like I was like, okay, I read it, great. Yeah, take it or leave it for me kind of book. The next book I read was Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This book is a really popular young adult series. I have previously read the Hunger Games series and the Divergent series, which I both enjoyed. This is a young adult dystopian series about the world has basically reached a point where there is no death and there's like peace and harmony, but in order to maintain population control, there's kind of like a group, it's called the Scythe, that is formulated, which is people who are respected and honored in society, but they have to kill people in order to maintain population. So they're called Scythes, and they go around killing people, but it's supposed to be like unbiased and fair. These two teens are taken to be apprentices and to become Scythes themselves, but they're pitted against each other, and a bunch of different stuff happens. I liked it. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I thought it was a great series. I'll just jump to what I read at the end of the month, which is the second book in the series called Thunderhead, and the series continues. So if you're into young adult dystopian series like The Hunger Games and like Divergent, I would recommend. It was great. The next book I read in September was The Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys. So Ruta Sepetys wrote The Salt and the Sea, and I loved it, so I decided to read all of her books. So the next book I read was Fountains of Silence. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. It's not as strong as The Salt of the Sea, but it's based in 1950s Spain, when Spain was under dictatorship, and it follows a girl and a boy from Texas that goes there, and it's kind of like their love story, but also all of the different tragic stuff that happened in Spain under this dictatorship. I really liked it. If you like historical fiction, I would recommend. Also, Between Shades of Grey by also Ruta Sepetys. I read this book as well in September because I love this author. This was also a World War II historical fiction. For me, a little less strong than Salt to the Sea, so I gave it a 4.5, but in Goodreads I rounded up to 5 out of 5. I really like this story. It's a lot more sad than the other ones for me, but it follows a girl who, her and her family get put on a train to work in a labor camp in Siberia. Basically her journey to survive and all of the tragedy that she encounters. Again, if you like historical fiction or anything about World War II, I would recommend. Ruta Sepetys is definitely one of my favorite authors. I think why I like her so much is because she based her stories, at the end of every book there's like a little notes that she's written on, like where she got the story from and the different people that she interviewed and the reasoning why she wrote it, and you can just tell that she went through a ton of research to write the book, and I really appreciate that, and I feel that when I'm reading it. 2 thrillers that I read in September. Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. This follows a woman whose daughter disappeared. We don't know if she was kidnapped or murdered or whatever. The mom doesn't really believe that the daughter ran away. She thinks something happened to her. It's like mostly the mom's story of like dealing with her child missing. Several years have gone by and she starts uncovering certain things that make her realize that something actually did happen to her daughter. And there's like a suspicious dude and you just don't know what's going on, but I gave it a 3 to 5. I liked it. If you like thrillers, you should read it. It wasn't my favorite ever. And finally, the last book that I read in September, and the last book of this wrap-up, is Playing Nice by J.P. Delaney. This is also a thriller. I listened to it on audiobook. Hi guys, Gloria from the future here. My camera died as I was filming that last book in September. I didn't notice that my camera died until after I had finished uploading all the footage. So I was talking about Playing Nice by J.P. Delaney. This is a psychological thriller based in the UK. There are 2 families whose kids were switched at birth at the hospital, and 2 years have gone by and they discovered this news. These 2 families are trying to figure out how to be in each other's lives, and one's quite wealthy, one's quite poor, one of the children are disabled. This was a very unique thriller. It touched on topics that I haven't read before or seen before in other books. This book was recommended to me by Gabby Reeds, and I thought it was a fantastic book. It was a great thriller. I gave it 4 stars. Highly recommend if you're into thrillers and mysteries. The twists were very interesting. And that's the wrap up. Thank you so much for watching to this very long video. I'm excited to talk about the rest of the books I read this year, and I'll see you in another video. Bye!